All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. So today I want to go ahead and share with you a bit about mastering your literary review or your literature review, and how we can go about the strategies for really creating something that's going to be impactful and showcases the research of others, and how that will frame your own research. Okay, so just a little bit of introduction. So my name is Ryan Mahokey. I'm a PhD candidate in the Literature and Criticism program here at IUP. And as you can tell from my background, I'm currently sitting at the top of a skyscraper filming this. So a bit of an interesting choice, but hopefully it works out well. So let's get into a bit of the questions that we would want to consider before going into this presentation. So, what is a literature review? And what do you already know about writing a literature review? So depending on where you're at in your program or which program you're in, your familiarity with this, will probably be, on, a different area of the spectrum, right? Some of you might be pros at this, right, and just want to kind of, refresh, while others are brand new. So just consider this for a few seconds. So what is it that a literature review is, and how do you think you write one? Now, for me, I'm in the literature and criticism program, so we're not huge into literature reviews, but we do something similar wherever we're basically, kind of cross-referencing materials and focusing on the foundational studies on a topic or a text, but also what is going on now, right? Because some of these foundational studies are going to be older, and so what are current scholars saying about these foundational studies, right? How are we building off of research from the past? And that is really what literature reviews are doing. So, just as an overview as far as what we're going to cover today, so we're going to be focusing on organizing your literature review, managing sources and contributions, building an argument, and of course, formatting your literature review. So, let's talk a bit about the overall organization. So, often we use something called the hourglass method of organization, and this is very popular in a lot of fields. And so, a lot of academic articles and dissertations are going to use this. But basically, if we're going by the hourglass shape, we can see that it's going to start with a broad introduction, and then it's going to launch into a specific topic, and then we get narrow, right? We focus on the specific purpose of our work, and then we provide a broad ending. So this is going to be really useful for your literature review, but also is going to be very useful for the rest of your work too. So this is something to really hold on to. And this won't only work for course papers, but can also work for, the heavy duty stuff like your thesis and your dissertation. So to break this down a little bit more, we want to look at it as far as how this would look in a course paper, a thesis, a dissertation, or something like that. And so we have our broad introduction, and then we're going to launch into this literature review, right? And so that's wherever we really start going from broad to narrow, because we're going through, the foundational studies, what people have said on this topic generally, the specifics that they've said on our topic, and how that research is going to frame our own research, right? And then we get really into our specific argument, and what we have chosen to cover for the specific piece. And then we get into the discussions and the the implications of our research, and then the broad conclusion. Okay, so often this will take a different form based on what you're writing. So as we see here, there are some programs that have the article option for the dissertation, and so you're often going to have this type of intro and lit review at the beginning of each article, right? Whereas with a dissertation, you may only have one. Okay. Um, and regardless of how many chapters it is, you have to provide the basic foundational information, and also what has been done since that. Okay, and we're going to get more into that as we go through. Okay, but so the hourglass method is something that you definitely want to remember, but also remember that this is going to change, and how often you use it will change based on what you're writing and how your program is designed. So what about sources and contributions? So we were talking about this idea before of kind of, the foundational studies, but then also what happens after, right? What are scholars doing right now, and who is citing these foundational studies in their own research, right? So that's something to look into. So here are some general principles and general questions that you want to ask yourself while you are writing the literature review, because this is what should be answered. So let's go through these. Why is this topic important? What is important now and in your specific context? What are the key works on this topic? So that's the foundational studies. And what are the new works? So in the last 5 to 10 years. Does the field agree or disagree on this topic? And how does the previous work intersect with your purpose for writing? And so, again, we're going to have a lot of issues that we run into when asking ourselves these questions. And, we see this especially with does the field agree or disagree on this topic? Because often we will have many different viewpoints coming into play depending on how broad this conversation has been historically and in the field. Okay, so we really want to hone in on how does this previous work affect our writing, right? And so what are we really going to do to interact with this previous work, and what do we have to say that is either different, or what do we have to add on to it? And so that's what we really want to start covering in the literature review before we get into the very specific discussion of the central argument that we are making. So what do well-written literature reviews look like? Well, here are some of the central tenets that we want to focus on. So one, they're going to be focused, right? So they're directly tied to the topic at hand, and they really present the necessary information. And so often a problem that editors come across is that literature reviews can include too many sources, and people feel as if it is completely necessary to include every source they can find on this topic. And it's important sometimes to remember to trim the fat, right? To really include what is necessary, for one, so that you're being fair to your topic, but also that you're framing your own research appropriately. And so it should also be well organized. So it's going to use clear organizational markers. Topic sentences are a must, as always, and headings to help readers understand the literature. It should provide broad overviews. So this is why it's kind of near the top of the hourglass, because we're still going to be kind of broad in the literature review, especially near the beginning of it. And it's going to depend heavily, depending on what field you're in. The social sciences, use a lot of paraphrasing, and they use quotes sparingly. Other fields, such as, literature and criticism and Cal, can often use quotations a bit more. So you are providing the overview, and you need to recognize the need to draw upon multiple sources. Okay, so this can be seen as table setting. You want to build a clear argument, so your own study's relationship to literature should be clear throughout. So it's important to remember this, and this is advice that we give to, Comp 101 students and undergrad, all the way up to folks writing their dissertation, right? The sources are there for you, right? They are there to assist you, and think of them as tools, right? And so it is your job to really find out how you can use previous research to best frame what you're going to be launching into, right? And what your own argument is going to be. And so you want to create a research space with your literature review as well. And so it helps establish why your work is needed and necessary to further the conversation on this issue. And it also furthers your purpose. So it carefully considers what sources and themes will best fit your study's purpose. Okay, so again, we can really think about here how you can best use previous research, both the foundational studies and those new studies in the past 5 to 10 years, to give yourself a really good frame to launch into your argument. And so here are some misconceptions that we get into. And we kind of referred to these before. But you need to cite everything, right? That's one of those misconceptions that we get into, where you're dealing with a broad topic that has had a lot of people talk about it, right? This is a huge conversation. And often people feel that they need to cite every single person that has talked about this topic. And that can be very overwhelming, right, for both the writer and the reader. And so it's important that we stay away from that. So a literature review should be a clear and focused examination of a key issue or topic. It offers an overview of what the field knows, including foundational works and new works, and it is focused on furthering your purpose. Okay, and you can think about this in a lot of different examples, right? A lot of different ways where we don't over-explain everything in our lives, right? If a doctor is describing to you a specific issue going on, they're not going to give a complete history of their medical schooling and all of the studying they did to get up to what they're talking to you about personally, right? They're going to give you the necessary information that furthers what they have to say. Okay, and so that can be seen too in the literature review. We do not have to give all of the research that we have done, only what pertains to this specific piece. So, the question that then arises is, okay, we're getting an idea of what not to include, but what do we include? And so we're going to be in the middle of a big Venn diagram here. All right, and we're going to want to focus on the three sections of this. And so we have an example of how you can go about something like this. Okay, so we have a study here being done that has the question: how does self-efficacy of English as second language learners affect the writing strategies they use in language courses? Okay, well, that's a pretty simple question. And so what do we have to focus on then? Well, we have self-efficacy as its own topic, we have writing strategies as its own topic, and we have English as a second language learners. Okay, so those are three separate topics that we're going to want to delve into in our literature review. Okay, and so it's really going to be, what we have focused on in our research question or our argument, and what literature we have read to get us to our argument that we are making, or the answer to the question we are asking. Okay, and so there are going to be a lot of different topics that intersect, in your research, and often it's kind of hard to really, kind of calm it down and stop, having new things intersect with your research because it's pretty constant. But this is a really good time to kind of practice how you can limit the amount of topics you are going to cover. Because in a literature review, again, you want it to be very focused. And so what are some of those tertiary topics that aren't really going to add anything to the argument at hand, and they're not going to further your own research goals? Okay, they may have something to say on your paper, but they aren't really at the heart of it. Okay, whereas in this example, we have three things that are really at the heart of this question here. Okay. So let's talk about the dinner table metaphor. So just like the hourglass metaphor, this is something that is going to be used a lot. And so this is discussed by Kamler and Thompson in helping doctoral students write. So as a writer, you invite the scholars you want to invite. You seat them where you want them to sit, you put them in the conversation with each other, and you direct the conversation. Okay, so you are not letting others take over your piece, right? This is your research that you're doing. This is your argument you are crafting. It is not somebody else's work, so don't treat it that way, right? Treat it like you're inviting these people to a party and you are going to let them speak whenever you feel it is appropriate. Okay, and so this is going to be in, how these other scholars are covered should always be in a very specific relationship to your own research that you are crafting. But you're always going to have guests of honor at this dinner party, right? The people that always need to be invited. And every field and subfield and genre and subgenre is going to have these special guests. Okay? And so you do have control over your dinner party, but these people will always be invited. And so it's research that helped establish a field, research that helps establish definitions that members of your field agree on, and or it is the first groundbreaking research on a topic, right? So an example I like to use is, if I was writing a dissertation on Marxism, imagine if I didn't cite Marx or Engels, right? That would be a bit odd. People would probably be like, well, this isn't going to be a great study on Marxism if I'm not covering Karl Marx, right? And so think about that as an example as far as who these guests of honor would be. And sometimes, obviously, it isn't that easy, right? The field might not be named after the person, but as you start to see more and more sources, especially newer sources, you'll see these foundational studies cited more and more in them. But there are also some other strategies for really determining what these foundational studies are. So number one is going to be reading, right? So you're going to see a lot of articles and you're going to see some works that get cited again and again. You can also look at the Google Scholar citation counts, and this is going to be very useful because you can see, hey, what are the most popular works in this field, right? Or what are the most popular works on this topic? And so that will give you a very good idea of what scholars have been trusted the most or who have been the most impactful, and what foundational scholars are still members of this conversation. But also ask an expert, right? In your field, you'll have obviously faculty. If you're on your dissertation, you'll have a committee that you can rely on. If you're in coursework, you can ask the professor of that course to just give you some advice. What are the foundational works that everyone pays credence to whenever they are writing a new piece, and that's something very important to consider. And so these are just 3 tips to help you really find what these foundational studies are so that you don't forget to invite the guest of honor to your dinner party. But then we also want to focus on new work and recency. So recency can be seen as anywhere in the last 5 to 10 years. All right, that's typically, especially for the social sciences, most people want to see studies within the last 10 years. Okay, because that really shows that they are still relevant and that they are reflective of where the field is right now and not where it was. So you want to engage with this current scholarship because it allows you to do 4 things. It allows you to understand what the field knows that is current. It allows you to be able to identify a study, article, or series of works and build upon it. Respond and engage with current tensions, arguments, and questions, and enter this conversation fully. Right? So you're not just focusing on what has been said, years and years and years in the past, but what is currently going on? What arguments right now are popular that should be addressed? But then we have the another part. We have building an argument, right, and positioning your work in that broader field. Because what we've been doing in the literature review so far is really just showing what that broader field is, right? What are the foundational studies? What's going on now? But you still need to have a prominent place as the writer in this. So, as a good idea of what journals will be looking for and what is typically respected in a scholarly article and a literature review specifically, here are some instructions to peer reviewers of a top journal. Why might this article be appropriate or not for publication in the journal? My assumption would be that the article contributes something new and or innovative to the body of research and scholarship in the field. Is this so? Is the article contextualized relative to scholarship and research in the field, and of course, that published in the journal? Is the article's focus well defined and articulated? Is the significance of the contribution signaled? And so, what do you notice about these instructions? What is standing out to you as far as what people would be looking for in an academic journal? Think about this for a second. So, here are some of the important parts. So we have that, is it appropriate? So is it appropriate to the audience and expectations of that audience? So does it pertain to what they know, the work they do, and what they value? And is it novel or innovative, right? Is it going to be a novel or innovative contribution to the field? So in other words, has it been said before? Is there proper contextualization? Right? So are we really delving into the conversation that's currently happening in the field, or are we kind of avoiding it and just going off in our own direction? And is our discussion clear and focused? So where do you make the argument about your work? Well, there are several places. So, of course, you can make an argument in the abstract. So it needs to be made clear, what direction you are taking the study in, and what contribution you are making to the field in your dissertation or thesis. Whenever you're making arguments in the lit review, you want to really move beyond the summary of the works that you're covering and position your own work in relationship to those previous works. So how is your work different, and what does the field need to take away from this to learn something new? Or how does your work solve a problem, and what contributions does your work make? And then, of course, arguments in the discussion. So if you were doing an empirically based article, the strongest position to make arguments is rooted in your data. If not, they are going to be rooted in your analysis. So arguments in your literature review should always be explicit, clear, and direct. Okay, so it should be very clear that while you are, entering this conversation with other scholars, you are making it clear that, hey, this is my contribution to the field. This is what I'm saying that either differs or adds on to what others have said. So let's go over some strategies for how you can craft this argument, right? Or how you can really, posit your research question or your argument within the literature review itself. And so this one's called the entry point, where you're really creating a space for your own work. Okay, so even though you're engaging with previous literature, you're also showing where the gap is, right? That you are going to fill with your own argumentation. And so there are major strategies that are covered in Belcher's Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks, which is a fantastic resource, especially for new scholars, and it's highly recommended. But let's go over 3 of these that are very useful. So the gap entry point. So that's going to be, basically there are a lot of different ways that you could situate a gap within a specific field's research. So this could be a lack of diverse populations or locations. If you're talking about data collection and things like that, there could be a lack of extensive research. So there's a new area to explore that has not been explored yet. Or there is a blind spot in the field where previous work has not considered, right? And so this happens a lot currently with things like intersection, right? Like we talked about before. is there a topic that intersects with what we are talking about that has not been covered before, right? Has this relationship not been researched and not been talked about in scholarly circles yet? And so that's a fantastic entry point for you to create a space for your own work amidst all of these other, really trusted, really, well-researched pieces that have been put out in the past. So number two is going to be supporting and extending. So you're not going to be against every work that you cover, right? It's, you don't have to be, in a brawl every time you're writing a scholarly piece. There's going to be works that you agree with, that you think, yes, this research was right. It really provided some important answers to us in the field. But how can we extend it, right? And so here you are looking to replicate previous work, extend it, expand understanding, and help build on existing theories. Okay, so this is really seen as just an extension where you are adding something important that has not been covered to something you agree with. But there's also going to be many moments where you disagree with research. And that's something that obviously can be uncomfortable at times, but it's something that is important for the field to grow. And so you want to do things like tackle assumptions, lore, or unsupported assumptions in our practices and theories. You want to address unacknowledged biases or blind spots. You can call out, the field and ask us to rethink how we practice things. This happens a lot within pedagogy. But it is also important to not use straw men or any other logical fallacies to engage in this approach. So you cannot do things that will represent previous research unfairly or inaccurately, because this will really take away from your piece and make you seem like a scholar that is not trustworthy. So if you give the strongest viewpoint of the research that has been presented to you previously, and you really give them the pure benefit of the doubt, right? It's something that's actually called steel manning, right? Wherever you're giving them the best possible uh, vantage point, then you can go ahead and disagree with them, and this is seen as a fair disagreement because you gave them proper credence, right? You gave the other research a chance to explain its argument so that you can then disagree with it. So this is very important to be careful with because you do not want to do it in the wrong way. And so doing this poorly is a great way to make enemies, of current scholars, and early mistakes can follow you in the field. And this is best done standing on a mountain of compelling data or outstanding analysis. Okay, so if you are not sure of something, if you just think that something's wrong but don't really have enough to purely back it up, then this is not the best approach to make just yet. So here's an example of the start of a lit review that frames an argument and demonstrates a gap. Okay, so we have areas here where we are covering both the gap in the field and then also how the author plans on filling it. Okay, so although writing studies scholars may associate and therefore study creativity mostly in creative writing, Chapter 1 argued that creativity is a necessary skill for success in writing generally. I also argued that nonprofit workplaces are sites where writing is ubiquitous and the need for creativity is especially pressing. And then down here, highlighted in green, we see, but we still need to define creativity. And so we have an issue, we have something that is left out of the field, that is left out of research, and we have a term that is not yet defined. And so here we see important outstanding gaps that the author then goes on to explain and show how they are going to help dissolve that gap. And here's an example of creating a research space as well. And so here we see the kind of the words here that are going to show that there are limitations to what has been already done. So further limited work exists on how epistemology may shape learners as they move across disciplinary writing contexts. Okay, so that is a gap. Then we have these studies, primarily exploratory in nature, call for a need for more research on disciplinary writing and student epistemology. Okay, so here we see that the gap is defined and that there is a problem with not addressing this, right? And that we need more research on this to assist us in writing pedagogy. But then how do we organize our argument? So here are some strategies that we can think of. So each paragraph should clearly indicate the overall topic of the paragraph. Okay, so this is going to be known as a topic sentence. And this is great too because this can assist you in outlining, because a topic sentence really shows what direction each paragraph is going to take. So this is the paragraph's topic sentence. Including these aids the reader in your overall argument and is an organizational tool to keep you on topic. Okay, so in an outline, you can really do kind of a skeletal look and write the topic sentence, and then give bullet points of what research am I going to be covering, how does this frame my argument, and so on. All right, so the topic sentence is going to be really useful for you, and is also going to assist the reader. And each paragraph should have one central or controlling idea, and each paragraph should be a synthesis of multiple studies unless one study is very, very important. It warrants its own treatment in the literature review. Most paragraphs work with multiple sources. So again, remember that in a literature review, you have limited time to really put a lot of research in. Okay, so you have to display a lot of the research that you've put into this piece and all of the important sources. So generally, you do not want to put too much time into one source, and you want to be able to constantly be synthesizing your sources. Okay. And conclude key paragraphs with a summary sentence that builds your argument and furthers your own work. And so this could be a general statement about the nature of the research, but one that is in line with your own study goals. And you also want to focus on synthesis and arguments, right? And these should be in your own words and with your own voice. So again, do not let others do the talking for you, right? Other people may be guests at the dinner party, but you are the host. And for certain paragraphs, usually the paragraphs that come at the end of a section include a final sentence that shows the direct relationship of your study to the previous research, right? So this always will keep your study grounded, and it will show the readers what direction you are heading in. So here we see an example where this was not done fantastically. Okay, so we have some problems with this paragraph. First of all, we have a source that's delved into automatically, and there's no topic sentence. It summarizes literature. It does not provide any argument, and there is no summary sentence at the end. Okay, and so this is one example of how this is not being done properly. Even though, yes, multiple sources are used, it is not done in an organized fashion, which can lead to confusion. So how can we correct this? So here's how this paragraph would look if we edited it to be proper and include all of the necessary components of a good paragraph in a literature review. So we have a topic sentence that shows the limitations, which is helping to create our own space. And then we have the final sentence, which shows a summary. It demonstrates a gap, and it signals a clear contribution to fill this gap from the present work. And so at the end here we have the proposed study, therefore, seeks to develop a response intervention that helps language students better understand the nature and purpose of response and multilingual writing courses. Okay, and so this is really showing how the author plans on revisioning this approach in the field and doing their own research and providing their own argument that differs from what has been said previously. So here we have an example of how this has been done well. So we have a topic sentence that introduces the paragraph providing a general overview, which we can see right here. And then we have a specific discussion of the studies, which is going to be more than one, and it puts these studies in relationship with each other to show the connections and how studies have worked off of each other. So we have a specific connection of previous research to the purpose of the piece, and we are creating a research space by making a specific argument. So how do we build in our own argument? So the argumentative pieces we saw in the example above do not need to show up in every paragraph in a dissertation, but they do show up in very specific points. So we have a good topic sentence in every paragraph that helps the literature and that describes the literature and helps further your own argument, okay? And so this is not going to be you transparently saying, hey, this is my argument and this is how it connects to the previous research, but it is guiding the reader. It is one of those organizational strategies that is going to assist in keeping the reader on the same page as you. And you can also include these sentences at the beginning of a section. So this is where you'll want to include a paragraph that offers a summary of not only what you will be covering, but what you are arguing. And at the end of each section, right, and we covered this a bit before, this is where you really want to make a clear connection between the overarching research that you've already covered and what role your argument plays in, kind of breaching this relationship and showing how there is more work to be done and how this research that has been done in the past can be furthered or extended. And other places, you can use these writing strategies often in other places where it fits. Okay, and this will come across pretty naturally wherever you find areas that you are covering, either foundational studies or new research, where there is an easy spot for you to show an area of disagreement or an area where a gap resides, where you feel that you can really explore your own argument briefly and frame it in a way that will, again, keep the reader on the same page. So even though there's been a lot of information, here are some key takeaways. So you always want to use entry points to position yourself in relationship to the larger field and conversations in the field. Okay, so you are always going to be a part of your paper, and you never want to let other voices take over. And you want to maintain organizational structure throughout, so use headings, use topic sentences, and a clear organization that is articulated to readers. Use a range of sources focusing on both new work and foundational studies. We covered this in the dinner party analogy, and highlight works that will best help you build the case for your own work and provide key definitions and information. And of course, make an argument. Make an argument about the previous literature in relationship to your own, show readers directly how your work fits, and signal clearly your own work's contribution. Ensure that you always have a seat at the table. So we have a lot of resources here at the CSC on topics that will help you in writing a literature review, writing a dissertation, or anything like that. So feel free to check out our website through the IUP webpage. And as always, if you are working on something and you would like to get a consultation on a literature review or a longer piece, feel free to schedule a session with one of our CSC consultants, and we will be more than happy to help you out. All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and I hope this was helpful and beneficial to you. And I look forward to hearing from you if you decide to schedule a consultation with us. All right. Thank you.